Easy guys, Storm here from Cringy Dad Gaming. So in this video we're talking about the Nightmare difficulty from the game Back 4 Blood. Now obviously we need to bear in mind that this is from the beta and the difficulty and the way this game mode is structured could be changed before the final release in October based on feedback from the community. However, playing this game mode myself and also looking at how other people feel about this game mode, the question is it too hard? And that's what we're going to be discussing in this video. Now I have to say this is very challenging and it is extremely hard. I mean, you can't call it nightmare mode without it being a nightmare, and that's pretty much what it is, to be honest with you. But it also depends on the game's randomly generated corruption cards to how the game throws different enemies your way. So sometimes you can be quite lucky and you can have a nightmare run that doesn't really add any harder riddance into the mix. But some runs it will throw a load in there. It will throw in riddance that explode with acid that do extra damage to you, ones that burn, you know, armoured heavy enemies and armoured SWAT riddance, and you know, that are harder to kill because of the armour they're wearing, amongst other things, you know, such as like hordes being called in at intervals with like a countdown timer. Now I really like that. I really like the fact that every time you go into a run you don't know how hard the challenge is going to be. And that kind of really changed the challenge for me each time I tried to give the nightmare difficulty a shot. But I think with people saying this difficulty level is too hard is probably also based on how many supply line points you've spent in upgrading your card deck. You know, so for those of you who don't know, the card deck is literally that. It's like a deck of cards that you create by purchasing cards at the supply line that give you buffs to certain things. So you can start with a card and then usually choose a second card, and each time you progress through each part of the act you can choose a different card to add to your deck while you're doing your run. And I just feel early on, and with the amount of time people have spent playing the beta, it just really isn't enough time to get a deck together that is going to give you enough high level buffs to be able to make your character survive this nightmare mode. It's going to take some grinding on the lower difficulty levels to be able to get some decent cards in your deck to be able to give your characters a buff. And I think that's probably why a lot of people have found this maybe too difficult. But there's other factors as well. A lot of people have jumped into this nightmare difficulty game mode thinking they can just run through it, guns blazing, like they probably do on the survivor difficulty. But with this you can't. You've got to take it at a much slower pace. You've got to retreat very often when you encounter too many enemies. You'll find yourself running back through the level quite often to give yourself enough space to be able to take out these enemies. But the space is also really important with where your teammates are, because with this there's so much more friendly fire involved in this game mode that if you're not careful you're gonna shoot your teammates by mistake, not only reducing their health quite a lot but maybe even downing them. Your team is really where this game mode really requires proper team play. If you're not playing with a good team of players that are communicating well, keeping an eye on each other's positioning, making sure they're using cards that complement each other as a team, you're going to really struggle and probably not even get through the level. Now in the gameplay that you're seeing in the background here, unfortunately I was playing with bots, and that's because I was finding that a lot of people either weren't playing this difficulty level because they were finding it too hard, or two, when people did join the game that I was in, they would leave it before we'd even got through the first section of the first level of Act 1. And I think that's probably because they were getting frustrated with how quickly they were being downed. I was often running back to the safe room to buy more ammo because you burn through it very quickly. And again, this is probably where your cards are going to come into play, where you can hold more ammunition. Maybe a starting card of having the extra ammunition pouches and things like that can be really rewarding early on in these levels, so you've got extra ammunition. I do feel that there maybe wasn't enough balance between the survivor difficulty up to the nightmare difficulty. There was a veteran difficulty in there that adds friendly fire, but it didn't really list anything else that changed in the difficulty other than that. And on playing through it, it didn't necessarily feel that much harder than the survivor difficulty, or at least that was my overall impression of it. I think there maybe needs to be a little bit more of a balance, but I also feel that if you're playing it through on the harder difficulties, then there should be a higher reward in terms of how many supply line points you get at the end of each section, because I found the supply line points being earned playing these harder difficulty levels when you complete them to not really be anything different to what you get on the survivor difficulty, meaning you can just pretty much run through the survivor mission levels to level up the supply line points to spend to then take on the harder difficulties. But I would like to see more supply line points being awarded for you if you complete one of the harder difficulty levels, purely for the fact that it's going to then help you be able to get through the nightmare difficulty. The way the levels are designed as well, there are a few things that can kind of help you as well, and it's knowing the way each level works. Like in this instance here, where we've got the drawbridge that drops down. When you drop that drawbridge down, it calls in a horde. But rather than just running straight up to it and lowering it, even if your teammates are there, there's this section here where you can jump up and you can shoot quite a few of the enemies that are below you before even dropping the bridge. And there's quite a lot of sections like this throughout all the levels where you can get these little heads up on enemies and use it to your advantage. It was just unfortunate on this playthrough here that there was actually a shrieker down below which calls in a horde, and you find that on the nightmare difficulty you get a lot of these. So like the birds, if you scare them, they call in a horde. But you can't always sneak past them, depending on where they're positioned, and the game is quite clever about where it positions some of these enemies, totally changing the route you take or the way you approach the situation. Now, after quite a hard battle, and probably took about 15 minutes, I managed to get through the first section of Act 1 on nightmare difficulty, which was pretty challenging, I have to say. And the fact that it was because there wasn't many corruption cards at play at that point was probably the reason why, as a solo player, pretty much playing with bots for almost that whole section, meant that I was able to get through to the next part. But then once we jump into that next part, the part 2 or level 2 or whatever you want to call it, chapter 2, I don't know what they're classed as in this, but you know, the next section of Act 1, the corruption cards that were then put into play just changed the whole challenge completely. There was a tall boy horde. Huge hordes of tall boys, crushers and bruisers will attack on a timer, which I already mentioned earlier. Ferocious running ridden, which are very fast and do a lot more damage to you. The armoured sprinters and the armoured exploders, which means that their weak points are armoured, taking it a lot longer for you to kill them. And as you'll see from the gameplay footage here, once we jump down from the balcony, because using the balcony just outside of the safe room here can sometimes be quite handy for one player to stay at the top to be able to take out enemies below at a distance. If I hadn't stayed up here at this point, we would have really been in a lot of trouble, because everyone who had jumped down got swarmed and went down. This gave me the opportunity to be able to revive them. I mean, staying alive was short-lived, I'll give it that. But the thing is like, knowing the map and how to use it to your advantage can also help with this harder difficulty. I don't think this nightmare difficulty mode is too hard. It's not impossible, it is doable, but you've just got to have the right team, the right cards, and the right knowledge of the best way to use the map and weapons to your advantage. There's so many explosive barrels and propane canisters around Using those to be able to take out large groups of enemies is something I found extremely handy, like you just saw with the armoured exploder there. Making sure you shoot the armoured SWAT enemies' helmets off first, then getting a headshot is the way to kill them. So understanding how to kill each enemy type, getting a good team together who know what they're doing, and having some really good cards to be able to buff your character is probably going to be what you're going to need to invest time in if you're going to successfully take on the Nightmare difficulty. At this point, unfortunately, it was pretty much time for us to die at this stage. Is the Nightmare difficulty too hard? Well, yes, it is hard, but I don't think it's too hard. I think you just need to go in with a different mindset. I'm really excited for the game's launch in October to be able to really try and buff up my character and hopefully be able to get through this challenge to the very end. So, just watch this space for more Back 4 Blood. I will be covering this game a lot more on the channel once it launches. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on another video. Thanks for watching.